Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us once again for Let's Talk Art. I'm Sarah Hall, Director of the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts, and I'm joined by our Agnita M. Stine Schreiber curator, Daniel Fulco. For any of you who might need a Zoom refresher, this is a webinar format. So we approach these programs as conversations with back and forth, and that includes you. So if you want to ask or answer questions, you can use the chat or you can raise your hand, and we don't mind being interrupted. You can also adjust your screen view at the top right between the gallery view or speaker view, and gallery view will show you both of us. Speaker view will just show you one of us speaking. And it is so beautiful tonight. I'm looking out my window next to me at a gorgeous October sky. And I say that thinking of my mother, who always talked about how she loved October skies. And I considered zooming this from outdoors, but it is going to get dark because these days are shortening, and there's also a fair amount of traffic noise where I live. So that would be distracting. But it is a great day for us to talk together about the attraction of autumn for artists. And I am just going to add a couple other sort of a commercial for museum activities and a personal sort of public service announcement, which is, if I'm a bit dull tonight, I apologize, because I have been inside isolating with COVID all week after a trip to Rome last week. So I hear my mother's voice also telling me that if I weren't gallivanting around, I wouldn't be not feeling well this week. But I am fine. And this is just a reminder to everyone that I guess these autumn surges are part of our lives now. So please take care and be healthy, all of you. In terms of museum programs, we have so much going on, and we'll talk a little bit at the end of tonight's program about some of those things in terms of exhibitions. But we do have our annual treasure sale, which is so much fun. The preview party is Friday, November 3rd, I think it's from 5 to 8. It's $35 a person, but it gives you first dibs on the things that you find that night. And also you can have a glass of wine and socialize. And we have our preview for Picasso on Paper, the artist as printmaker, on November 9th from 6 to 8. That show opens to the public November 11th. We also have a lot going on for the holidays this year. We're going to be open Friday nights, December 1st, 8th, 15th, and 22nd until 8 p.m. So check out our website for more details about that. And in the meantime, I'm going to let Daniel pull up his PowerPoint, and we will start talking about the beauty of autumn landscapes.
So as I was going through and preparing for our discussion tonight, I was just amazed by how many autumn landscapes we have in the collection. And also when I was driving around Sarah this evening, I was looking at the foliage, as I was coming home, and I said, how perfect this is for this evening in these weeks where we have all of this color.
It is beautiful. And I moved progressively southward in my life. So when I moved from the Buffalo area to Pittsburgh, we got 3 weeks more spring and 3 weeks more fall. And now that I'm in Maryland, I get fall a little bit later. So I suspect up in Western New York, where I'm from, the color is pretty much gone at this point, but it is gorgeous around here right now.
It really is. So we begin tonight with a real favorite in the collection, and one by a very noted artist, Jasper Francis Cropsey. This is the landscape in the collection. It's called Autumn Landscape with River, and it's been in the collection for many years, since 1955. And a bit later on in the presentation, we'll talk to you a bit about its conservation that was done several years ago, as that's also part of our theme tonight. But this just really captures the season in all of its glory. You have these hikers or explorers who are seated here. You see the sun setting here and the rays emanating out from it. And then you have the variety of color on the leaves. And you can also see some of the plants that are also beginning to die. It's just so majestic and inviting. It makes you really want to be there, at least to me anyway.
Well, there's so much you could say about Cropsey, and obviously we could do an entire Let's Talk Art about him. I did have one quote for Cropsey. He was devout, devoutly Christian, and he said, "The beauties of nature." This is from an 1846 letter he wrote. "The beauties of nature had a charm, and the voice of God came to me through every motionless leaf, on every blade of grass, the odor of the flower, and in every breath of the air I drew." And so I think you kind of feel that reverence in the way he paints. I often, there's a lot of things before we went live with everybody here. I talked to Daniel about, some big ideas here. I think one of the big ideas is this American landscape movement of the 19th century being part of the larger Romantic movement. And what does that mean? What do these landscapes mean in terms of American identity? I mean, we're looking at a sunset, so we are looking west. That's often brought forth as a metaphor in these for manifest destiny, or the sort of westward movement of America, and also transcendentalism and other ideas that are floating around in the world at the time. So I guess I wonder, did people in the 19th century, this is a big question, but would they have looked at this landscape differently than we do? I wonder about that.
That's a very interesting question. I mean, I think they certainly would have, particularly when industrialization goes full steam ahead. And that was certainly something that was in the consciousness of numerous Hudson River School artists. I think of George Innes, for example, who some of his paintings, some scholars have interpreted them in terms of being anxious about modernization, particularly if he shows a steam locomotive or a factory. But here it's a sort of retreating to the pure nature and immersing oneself in it.
So so Cropsey is a student of church. Am I right? Was he one of?
Yes.
Students? Mm-hmm. So, and we know the church was a student of Cole. So we've got generations happening, through the Hudson River School movement, the landscape movement in the U.S. But of course, Cole, the founder of what we call the Hudson River School movement, he was an environmentalist. Even so early, he was very ambivalent about what he saw happening to the American landscape. So it is really interesting.
Yes, and Cropsey also spent a lot of time in Thomas Cole's studio, actually, and he also he lived in the studio that Cole had occupied in Rome. He really admired his work. So he was also influenced by him. And this really becomes a specialty of Jasper Cropsey. His number of autumn scenes are really striking. Here's one in the National Gallery.
There's a lot of writing by art historians about the search for American identity and American nationalism, and this idea that we don't have the crumbling ruins and these evidences of Western civilization. Obviously, we have evidences of other civilizations that were perhaps not valued, but we don't have the same kind of symbols of human accomplishment as Europe does. And so using the expansiveness of our landscape and the uniqueness of our landscape as a symbol of American identity and pride was one of the sort of tools artists use. And within that sort of toolkit is this is autumn, actually, because the colors don't do this. They aren't as dramatic in Europe. And of course, there's that great famous story about Cropsey, whose very large monumental landscape that's in the National Gallery in London, I believe, that he asked a friend to send over leaves so that he could show actual leaves next to the painting, kind of like an early installation art. I have a little excerpt from a letter here, but some of the English critics were incredulous at the brilliant reds and oranges of Cropsey's autumn scenes, having never experienced these hues in their native land. Cropsey wrote home asking for autumn leaves that he could display with autumn on the Hudson River. His friend F.A. Otis replied, "Some 2 months ago, I gave to Mr. Falconer for you a large collection of very fine forest leaves, which my beloved wife and I gathered and pressed last fall for you. I was much chagrined the other day, calling on Mr. Falconer, to find he had not yet found an opportunity to forward them to you. When they do come to you, will I trust you find them as fine as when we packed them? If so, I am confident you will be able to convince your English friends that your rendering of the American autumn forest is true." So when he finally received those leaves, he scattered them around the base of the painting while it was on exhibit. I love that.
Yeah, it's a really great anecdote. And also another thing that really intrigued these artists was that the autumn precedes winter. It's a sign of gradual decay. There's spectacular beauty, but it shows how ephemeral the seasons in general are. So this really held a lot of attraction for them. It was about the fleetingness of and the preciousness of nature.
Sure. It's like, often when you're seeing decaying things in a still life painting, but wrought on a sort of more universal scale. I did find, and this is going back earlier, and you will be very familiar with this, Daniel, Nathaniel Parker Willis, as early as 1840 in American Scenery, writes, "Either nature has wrought with a bolder hand in America, or the effect of long continued cultivation on scenery as exemplified in Europe is greater than is usually supposed. Certain it is that the rivers, the forests, the unshorn mountainsides and unbridged chasms of that vast country are of a character peculiar to America alone, a lavish and large-featured sublimity, if we may so express it, quite dissimilar to the picturesque of all other countries."
That really sums it up. And that's a nice segue into John Kensett's painting on the left that's in our collection called The Mountain Pool, which we believe was done in New Hampshire. And but we're not exactly sure. It could be somewhere else in the Catskills or the Adirondacks. But one of the things that's been pointed out about Kensett is that he would often pick a place that was a noted tourist attraction, like Trippimer Falls in Ithaca, New York, in the center there, or Rondout Creek in the Catskills here, that's in the New Britain Museum's collection. Mm-hmm. And he would do these to sort of market these areas, also his work too, to people who may be prospective tourists or who had actually gone there. I found that very intriguing.
Well, and I love the fact that you said tourist attraction. So this is a new thing. Tourism is a new thing, and easier transportation, access through developing train lines, access through roads and other kinds of development, probably aligned with industrialization, opens up areas of the country to people that hadn't been previously opened up. And I know later on, you have a section of French paintings, Barbizon paintings here. And of course, the train ride, the ability to get from Paris to Barbizon was a key factor in the sort of rise of that area in interest for artists. And so you see a lot of these areas, had boarding houses, had hotels, had particular places for, obviously, you had to have a certain sense of adventurousness about you. It wasn't like driving up to the Holiday Inn or something like that. But it is getting easier and easier by the year as these artists move forward.
It is, and eventually the railroad's going to be extended to the Great American West, and then, of course, people like Thomas Moran will open up tourism even further to explore the Rockies, and that craving for travel to see the unspoiled American landscape is going to accelerate with access. And again, this is just a beautiful work.
It's dreamy. It has this evanescent quality about it. You kind of do feel like you were maybe camping and got up in the morning to, fill your canteen and came across this misty, cool, chilly, view. It's just really lovely. And I think really interesting choice of something to portray.
I do too. And it also reminds me, as I was putting this together, I've actually been sort of experiencing some of the same scenes or weather. When I come in the morning, it's very early to the museum, and the temperature difference this morning, it was in the 40s. And by the end of the day, it was 80 something.
It's wild. The sun gets enough time to warm it up, but then overnight with these shorter nights, we cool right down.
Yeah, these artists really capture that.
Mm-hmm.
And these are just a couple of other examples. You can see he was fascinated by the use of lakes.
And so he's painting these like really, and I'm opening up a question that I don't have an answer for necessarily without doing a lot more thinking and maybe reading and talking to people who are specialists. But these Kensett, these misty, mysterious Kensets are exactly sort of Civil War period. So how much is this about uncertainty? I don't know. I mean, you could think of these misty places where you're not quite sure where you're heading off to as being a metaphor for the state of the world at that point.
I agree. I think it also could be a form of retreat from what was going on. That unspoiled nature contrasts with the destruction of culture and of people. And that by going into these places, Kensett is a way to get away from that and to provide something that perhaps is soothing for American viewers.
And I found this really fun when I went through and looked at the PowerPoint, because I haven't been as participatory this week as I usually am. And I went through and took a look at what Daniel had put together. We are, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we are basically the repository for the materials related to the artist Henry Livingston Hillier, correct?
That is correct.
We just had some of his sketchbooks on display as part of the Treasures of State exhibition. And, while museums always worry about redundancy in their collections and making sure they're having the finest examples of an artist's work that they can get, there is an incredible appeal to holding someone's archives or holding a really large selection of their work, because you get this sense of knowing the person. And I've become fond of Henry Livingston Hillier over the last few months, even though I didn't know him before being at this museum.
Me too. When I came to the museum, I was really taken with his work that was donated by his great-grandson, Joseph Brewer, in 1970. And
so,
yeah.
Read that. Paint each object as though it was the figure of your beloved.
Yes. I think that's a fabulous quote. And it really says a lot about that you must have passion for what you're representing.
And a certain amount of, I talked about cropsy and reverence. I mean, I think that has to do with reverence as well, like, care and love going into it. And Hillier, so I know this from the exhibition that we just did, but he painted in Western Maryland and in the DC area. And you just interrupt me if I get anything wrong, Daniel. But he was an early proponent of turning the Rock Creek Park area into a park. Am I correct? He advocated in letters petitioning for the preservation of that area. And that really, I have another artist that I have a real soft spot for that we're going to look at later is Théodore Rousseau, the French Barbizon artist who was key in the Forest of Fontainebleau being preserved as a national park in France. And so the fact that Henry Hillier is here in the US doing a kind of analogous thing is endearing. And, I'm the daughter of a naturalist. I was hiking when, I could barely walk, and being shown sap on trees and where animals ate and how to walk safely on slippery rocks and all of those things from a very young age. So these artists who really are attached to the landscape as preservationists and environmentalists, they have a real place in my heart.
Me too. I find Hillier's work just beautiful. He has a way with establishing, these contrasts and showing us light. We have probably all experienced this going for a hike. At this time of the year, there you have the crunch of the leaves under your feet. And, whether it's an overcast day or a sunny day, the smell of those leaves, the smell of autumn, he really captures them well. These two are November scenes. And then he loved to paint on Rock Creek and also along Potomac. And here's one scene here, Autumn on Rock Creek, probably somewhere in the Washington area. And there are those haystacks, and there's a farmer there, and there's some cliffs. It's probably not far from Rock Creek or perhaps Great Falls near McLean, Virginia. And here's the Georgetown
Before we were on tonight, talking briefly, I said to Daniel, I wonder when leaf peeping really became a thing. Probably always, as long as there were beautiful leaves and people around to admire them. But in terms of sort of promoting it as a season and a time, I'm not really sure when that came into being, but I think we're sort of semi-curating a leaf peeping exhibition here. Maybe we have to bring all these things out at some point and have a little leaf peeping show at the museum.
That would be very nice. And Hillier in his time was not very well known, and he still isn't today, because he was competing with people like John Consett or Jasper Cropsey. And then a whole new generation of artists that come along. So he kind of fell into obscurity. And in addition, he only lived 46 years. He contracted malaria, and he died from it. Another artist whose work we have a lot of in the museum and we're the repository for is the local Hagerstown painter, Claggett D. Spangler, who, again, is not a household name, but we have some 200 of his paintings and drawings.
We'll say something really shallow, which is it might not be a household name, but it's a really fun name to say.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
it should be a household name just for that reason alone.
Yeah, it's an unusual name too. Some have argued that he may have been a student, but we don't have proof, of William Merrick Chase, who's also in our collection, represented by the still life of fish that we have in the Smith Gallery. But we received a lot of Spangler's works in the 1960s. And then there was a huge show of his work in 1969, as you can see there, and then in 2004. And we have something that's perfect for autumn, a view of Fairview Mountain near Clear Spring in Washington County. And that's what it looks like a lot now driving around in Washington County. So it's most appropriate.
And it does. So sometimes when we're looking at these landscapes, and I know even as early as, I think like the late 1830s and 1840s with Thomas Cole, he is choosing to eliminate signs of man from his canvases. But we know that this kind of looks like this now. So.
Yes, depending where you go. And he's celebrating agriculture as well. You have a lone traveler here on this road. And then you can see the sheep in the background. These kind of themes really interested him. We have a lone figure. As Spangler grew older, he became more influenced by Barbizon artists, who we're going to talk about. And this idea of the lone figure, or the figure on a periphery of a forest, is a key part, right, Sarah, of the Barbizon tradition.
Well, and it's interesting because if you contrast the two that we just looked at, there is a naivete sort of about this scene, right? It feels extreme. It feels very synthetic in a way. And the figure looks a little, like staffage, just complete kind of like a chubby little addition to sort of fill out the scene. And then below, there's a certain kind of sophistication. I mean, I think you can tell it's an older artist regardless. There's a sense of maturity here. It's more about mood, right? There's a elegiac mood to that.
You have that here. We have a whole series of these in the collection that were presented to us by various donors in the 60s and 70s. And then Spangler, very interestingly, befriended our founder, William Henry Singer. And when William came to Hagerstown, let me just go back, to court Anna Brew, who is going to be his new wife. There's their wedding picture down there. The two of them met one another and went off sketching in Washington County. And I'm not sure if this little watercolor down here by William Singer is of Washington County, but it was in that time period where he was still coming back to our area. And it's really neat to discover the two knew each other. Spangler was a little older than William, not quite 20 years, about 20 years older than him. But I find that really neat. There's this anecdote, and they'd go out sketching. And these are the kinds of things that Spangler would have done. He would have done, this is actually oil on board.
And of course, we know that William Henry Singer was most comfortable going out into nature and having communal time with art and nature. He was not a super social guy. So to meet somebody that he could do that with, he probably was really happy.
Yes, definitely. And this is a pastel portrait that Spangler did. It's actually really good. That's his own work. Almost has a photographic quality.
Sure.
And he had a knack for the autumn scenes. He really did. They're beautiful, and you see them at different times. So this being a little bit earlier autumn with the yellows, this is gorgeous.
I get a sense that he's here working in Washington County, but he is very aware of trends in the larger art world. And you see that reflected in his work. It's quite interesting.
Yes, and he traveled overseas, Spangler. He did study in Europe, in Germany, and in Italy. So he was aware of what was going on. And like the American Impressionist Walter A. Clark, who was influenced by George Inness, who's another very important artist, he depicted the corn shocks, and that's a really nice theme, is the fall harvest. Here's Spangler's interpretation of one right in our county. And then here's Corn Shocks by Walter A. Clark, who was associated with the Cos Cob art colony in near Greenwich, Connecticut, also Gloucester, Massachusetts, and Algonquin, Maine. Another one of these artists in our collection, I couldn't find much information about him, Washington County, Hagerstown, Herman Kohler. And his works are beautiful. They're actually quite similar to Claggett Spangler's, but they're a bit later.
And perhaps there's a sense, and this is not fair for me to say, not really knowing Kohler's work, but there's a certain sense that he has a thing he does here, right? He has the reflections on the water, the meandering stream. He has a shtick or a specialty, and they are lovely. I wouldn't say no to one.
Yeah, me neither. And I love the title October Idyll, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a whole series of these. These are a bit later, though, in the season. And here we come to the Barbizon painters we were mentioning with Theodore Rousseau. Yeah.
And Narcisse Virgile Diaz de la Peña and Jules Dupré. And I'm not, I've talked a lot about Barbizon artists over the last 15, 20 years of my career, Rousseau being a real favorite of mine. And there are a lot of wonderful quotes related to Rousseau, but my favorite may be that he heard the voices of the trees and he tried to reveal the secret of their majesty. That when he was in the landscape, he was somehow communicating with it. And of course, I mentioned that he was really key in the Forest of Fontainebleau being set aside as a preserve in France. It's about, I think it's like 30 to 35 miles outside Paris. It became a relatively easy train ride and excursion for people. It was a whole new thing when, Millet and Corot and I'm trying to think of who the early folks were. So if I'm missing any key early artists, throw them in there, Daniel. But what they were retreating from cholera in the city, I believe. And so, Millet goes with his family. He has lots of kids and he continues to have lots of kids. So I don't know how many he had when they relocated to Barbizon, but they're retreating for health purposes, but they become really attached. And it is part of the Romantic movement, and a reaction, I think, against the rationalism of the Enlightenment, this new kind of finding of personal identity in your own land. And so, artists would go to Italy and they would study and they would learn how to do classical landscapes, and everything kind of looked like Italy that they painted. Landscape was not about personal connection or response. And the Barbizon artists really are sort of create a revolution. And of course, there are related movements in different countries as well. So the Hague School in Holland, and of course our Hudson River School here in the US, they're all kind of connected with this idea of let's look at our own land. And the Forest of Fontainebleau was not, it was royal hunting grounds. There was a hunting chateau there. It was really rocky. There like big limestone chunks around, and people, you often see those lone figures. They're women like gathering firewood or tending to a lone cow, which was like the most, you were pretty much destitute if that's what you were doing. You had one like hungry cow that you were trying to get enough grass for. So Millet is a revolutionary artist, and he's a Barbizon artist, but he's also a realist. And so there's this interesting crossover there between this romanticism and subjectivity and what turns to some artists into politics, and even for Rousseau into a sort of activism.
Definitely. And, when I look at this painting, which is on view in our Singer gallery, as I was looking at it today to get a better photo of it, there's sort of this suggestion of movement in it, almost as if we were standing there, the wind would be blowing, because of the way he's done these brush strokes. They're very thick and very fast. It's
those clouds are moving, right? Yeah. There's shade from the clouds. The clouds are moving over us. It's a very active landscape. You're right. I agree with that. And it's tiny. It's really intimate, personal kind of feeling. I totally love Rousseau. And I love Diaz de la Peña too, who's a real character. Did a lot of paintings of called the Pond of Vipers. Did a lot of paintings about coming across enclaves of poisonous snakes apparently in the forest. And I should not be laughing because he lost his leg to a snake bite, and I remember actually chuckling once because I was reading about him, and there was sort of a quote from a contemporary that was, he was a really great guy, and missing a leg didn't seem to get him down. In spite of what he'd been through, he was an upbeat person to be around. And certainly he does these really gooey paintings, a lot of real thick impasto in them, and a lot of sort of, a darker mood, I think, often.
Yes. One of the things I've always been drawn to in his works is how he does the highlights on the bark of the trees.
It's reminiscent of Blakelock. Now, I've never really thought of that before, but, Blakelock's another artist that I'm kind of a sucker for. So that putting the light into the trees. Yeah.
And then we have Jules Dupré, who was very much influenced by Rousseau and Diaz de la Peña. Dupré, though, again, he's very interested in storm clouds. He's interested in motion, and also these reflections, as you see here, the watering cow.
I often wonder. So a number of these Barbizon artists, and I think Dupré is one of them, painted porcelain, or at least at a point in their career, they were porcelain painters. And when I see that kind of interest in reflectivity, I often wonder if that comes from having worked with a very, reflective surface, an interest in sort of shine and sheen. I have no idea, but there is certainly that happening in this landscape.
Yes, and some of the Barbizon artists did do ceramic painting, most notably Jean-Charles Cazin. I didn't bring an example of his work, but he influenced American artists like Charles Folkmar, who was in our Treasures of State exhibition. And that was something that Kazan worked on, were these ceramics. And he too is interested in reflections and light. So it's interesting you mentioned that. Now, a really pivotal figure who's influenced by Barbizon and sort of pulls this back into America and introduces something called tonalism, which seeks to capture moods before sort of the development of Impressionism, almost simultaneous, is George Ennis. And this is our piece Coming Storm, which is not an autumn scene, but I wanted to bring him in because Ennis is really an important figure in this move to create moods in paintings in American art.
There's an Ennis quote, and I won't get it right, but at one point I was writing about William Harnett, who is a trompe-l'oeil painter. He's known for, painting violins so realistically, that paintings that would hang on tavern walls, and people would try and reach and pull the violin down. And Ennis, there's a quote about intellect versus imagination, right? And technique. And Ennis really felt like that kind of imitative technique was meaningless, because it took the intellect and the imagination of an artist and the way they interpreted the world that they saw to create art. So if you were just doing trompe-l'oeil painting, you weren't really making art. You were just, demonstrating technique. So I love Ennis. I love Harnett too. I hold them both, and I understand what Ennis is saying. It has a lot to do with that personal connection and that subjectivity that comes out of the Romantic movement, mixing that with intellect a bit.
And he had a great impact on numerous artists like John Francis Murphy, who, when he was young, here he was 30 years old, Autumn Morning, this beautiful watercolor from the Mersons, some of our great donors, is so different from the other one we have in the collection called Autumn Gale on the right. What a shift. This more in the tradition, it is moody, but more in the tradition of Hudson River School painting and tonalism. And then here, it's truly a mood picture. I mean, it's almost getting abstract if you look at it. And one artist who really was an early champion, there were many, but among them was John Constable and J.M.W. Turner in his later years. So there are precedents for this, but by the time we get into the late 1800s, a lot of artists are interested in this. This is just really beautiful, this one.
Mm-hmm. Very lovely.
The movement again, the winds. Or Robert Bruce Crane, who was has studied as well. He was an American Impressionist tonalist, and he studied with George Ennis as well. This actually hangs in our front office. We see it. I see it every day. It's a wonderful piece, Afternoon in Autumn, showing a farm, and then in the distance, this looks like a farmhouse or a barn.
And it's interesting that the way the perspective he's using that doesn't center that. It's not the object of the composition. It is truly maybe what he's seeing as he's walking along and experiencing the landscape. He's not making it in the least bit synthetic. Not
at all. We've got this dividing line here with the fence. And what a contrast with the
light is gorgeous.
It's wonderful painting. This one I really liked. This looks almost late autumn, like getting into November, by an artist named William Hills Hutchins, who was actually born in Colchester, Connecticut, which is very close to where I grew up. And then he moved around quite a bit. He studied in France, and then served time in World War I, and spent a lot of time in Italy. And we actually had one of the first exhibitions of Hutchins' work at the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts in 1964, because he was one of the founders of the art program at American University in Washington. So I found that to be very interesting. And his approach is really different. He was interested here in the reflection off the water, and these
It looks like
rattles.
there might have been a freeze, like maybe it's early morning and there's a little bit of iciness on top of that water.
That's what it looks like, yes. And again, many of these artists are not as well known. Clarence Montfort Gihon, or Gihon, however he pronounced it, who was a student of William Merritt Chase and Kenyon Cox, the famous mural painter. And he went to France and studied at the Academy Julian with J.P. Laurence and Benjamin Constant. But then he moved into this very impressionist style, which actually looks a lot like Whistler in terms of these dabs of color.
Almost surreal, right? Or symbolist. I mean, I look at that and I think of some things I've seen by Odilon Rodin.
Yes.
There's these like floating trees, and but it's lovely.
The fences just sort of suggest that he's sort of almost incised into his composition here to make that mood. We also have an artist named Louis Frederick Bernecker, who was an illustrator, but also a mural painter. He received commissions for American churches and public schools, part of the New York Watercolor Club and Allied Art Association. And we have a series of these beautiful sort of idyllic nudes, watercolors on paper that he did, including one called Autumn Nude that's sort of an allegory, and then Summer Nude on the right.
So I will admit, it's funny for me to see these. I mean, they're very close to 20th century works, and maybe are even 20th century works. And where I worked before, which I talk about with some frequency, we had a child Hassan at the Frick, and I think it was called June Idyll. And it was a very green landscape of rolling pasture down to a stream. And then there were a couple of bathers. And it's a phase in Hassam's work where he's using the nude in landscapes, and it's classical and classically inspired. It's like suddenly we're looking at goddesses or myth, stories from mythology, but it feels very funny in an American landscape painting, right? I don't know that it completely works. Artists, I guess, always looking for ways that they can get the female figure in there if they want. But these feel like that to me a little bit too. Like, okay, I'm really interested in doing some nudes, and so I'm going to use this allegorical setting to portray them. And it's funny because if they were, if the work was if it was older, if it came from an earlier period in art history, it would feel completely okay. But somehow, when you see it as modernism is beginning to kick in, there's a funny feeling about it for me.
Yes, it's kind of, it's very anachronistic. If these were done between the 1910s and the 20s, modernism is beginning to take off in America, certainly already in Europe. And this is looking back. It's trying to reach back for
looking back in a way that's not, we're going to have a lot of nudes in the gallery in a couple of weeks when we open Picasso. Yes. There are nudes with a very different kind of attitude. There are nudes with, obviously even though we talk a lot about Picasso's classical period and his interest in classical art, when he's portraying female nudes, they don't feel anachronistic.
No, they don't. Now, in terms of the autumn theme, very different context. I wanted to bring this along to sort of showcase the diversity of our collection with the famous Ando Hiroshige, the Japanese printmaker, and the full moon at the harbor, or Lady Murasaki watching the autumn moon at Ishiyama. And this is a beautiful print. It's wonderful. And the story of this goes, it was said that Lady Murasaki, who's most famous for having authored the tale of Genji around the year 1000 CE, was said to have written the novel while looking at the harvest moon over Lake Abiwa during a stay at the Buddhist temple at Ishiyama-dera. And that's where we see her here in this
I love that
three-part
you can
print.
see her writing material. I'm a sucker for details, and I love
Look at
that you can, yeah, see her things all spread out there and her light.
Yeah. It's stunning. And I should mention that this is it should be a little preview of our exhibition we're going to have of Floating Beauty, Women in the Art of Ukiyo-e, next year.
A year from now, we will have that show, yes. And that'll be a lot of fun.
It will be. This is a really lovely one, and having to do with the autumn moon.
So I should say, because I know that you have a lot of good stuff in this PowerPoint, but we're into like 45 minutes in. And if people are interested in hearing about conservation, we should maybe skip our founder, William Henry Singer, and head there. Yes. But if people really want to look at more autumn landscapes and just kind of look at pretty pictures and chat, I'm happy with that too. So if anybody has a strong opinion, they can throw it in the chat. Otherwise, what do you want to do, Daniel?
I think we'll move forward with the conservation. Let's see here. We've had a number of projects that we've worked on, and one of them tying in very nicely with the autumn theme that we had done, and now it's the end of 2020, early 2021, was the Cropsey autumn landscape with river. And this painting was veiled, and this is showing you it before conservation, was veiled under discolored varnish. Numerous unexpert touch-ups, but it was really the painting, when I got to the museum, it was very dirty. And we had it conserved. And one of the things that happens during conservation is the painting certainly is brought back to life. But in the process, we also discover really neat things. And in this case, it was about on the reverse of the picture, Albert Goupil's and company, the art supplies that he sold, which was located at 5th Avenue and 22nd Street in New York City. And it was the label used by a very famous dealer named Charles Knoedler, who's shown here on the left. And of course, yeah, go ahead.
Goupil was as a French sort of impresario, right? He becomes fabulously wealthy by making reproductive prints of famous paintings. And we actually did an exhibition where I used to work called Jérôme Goupil, which was about how he basically had an alliance with the artist Jean-Léon Gérôme in order to promote and propagate Jérôme's work through the worldwide art market. So reproductive prints and kind of creating layers of art available to different economic strata was a innovation of Goupil's, or at least something that he mastered, whether he innovated it or not. And then I believe the Knoedlers worked for Goupil and then did their own gallery. And my former boss was writing a book on the history of Knoedler and Company. And they even had an office in Pittsburgh because, of course, Henry Clay Frick was in Pittsburgh buying paintings, as were other, Pittsburgh industrial millionaires. And so it was worth their while to have an office in Pittsburgh as well as in New York. And unfortunately, Knoedler closed, like 5 years ago, maybe now, Daniel, because of a scandal involving forgeries. And there is, I think, I can't remember the name, but there is a documentary you can stream that is all about that. And I can look it up. And if anybody wants to email me and ask me about it, I can find it for you. But yeah, it's really interesting because it is at this point where American wealth is really becoming active in the art market. And there's a lot of transfer of material also from Europe and the UK to these wealthy American collectors.
Yes, and you can see them pictured here in this, looks like a Harper's Weekly illustration. In the gallery itself, inspecting and examining and discussing all of these works of art that are on view and that are for sale.
Fun.
And it's very likely that the Cropsey at one point, either the frame was purchased from Knodler, or perhaps even from Goupil here, 5th Avenue and 22nd, or the frame, or one of the components. So it has that label on it. And that's what the gallery looked like back at that time. See works on paper in there, all kinds of other things.
Mm-hmm.
And these are some examples of some of the materials that the artists at the time would have used. The kind of color tubes that were introduced that made it much easier to work, because previously, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, you had to grind and make your own pigments, which was much more painstaking than being able to.
For sure. And if you wanted, there's this example up here in top right, like if you really wanted to take paint outdoors with you and paint en plein air, you put it in a bladder. So right around the time, the Barbizon artists were not really plein air painters. They would sketch and they would work in plein air, but most of their major canvases are studio pictures. So the outdoor experience is about sketching more than it is about plein air painting. But and that's the case for, I think, a lot of 19th century artists, from those 1840s on. But the introduction of paint in tubes, collapsible tubes, and these paint boxes made it much, much easier for people to go out and have that direct experience. And I'll say, and you know this, Daniel, that I just was recently at the Florence Griswold Museum in Old Lyme, Connecticut, which is an enclave of American Impressionism, which is not dissimilar in a way to the way the village of Barbizon worked for the Barbizon artists. There were a couple of different inns in Barbizon that would fill up with artists. They are still sort of places where people make pilgrimages because of the history associated with them. But the Griswold Museum, there was a boarding house there run by Florence Griswold, and artists would go and spend the summer there. And it sounds like kind of happy chaos of bohemian type people and lots of dogs and painting supplies. So it was fun. I was just there for the first time recently. We know William Henry Singer spent part of the summer of 1907 there at Florence Griswold's boarding house and part of that summer enclave. So it is a neat kind of later than the Barbizon School, but connected experience for sure. They have, as part of their collection on their grounds, they have a recreation of an artist's mobile painting studio, where like a little cart where the artist could be protected from bad weather, even had a little wood stove in it, very small. And, you could go out no matter the weather and kind of, find your whatever your particular perspective or outlook on the world was going to be for the day. It's neat.
Very neat. The results of the conservation
are out there painting. I saw Renoir's paint box, and that reminded me.
Yes.
They're painting and right in plein air, and wonderful stories about some of the crazy things they did. I think Monet had like a ditch dug. He was working on a really big canvas, and he needed to be able to reach the top, so he had like a ditch dug so that he could lower the painting into it and be able to work on the top of it. So fun to see.
And during treatment, a lot of dirt was removed from the cropsey. It was really very dirty. These are some detailed photos showing you how painstaking it is. The conservator has to go through with Q-tips, and they often use saliva to do the cleaning. It's called something like a low pH or neutral pH cleaning solution. When you see that specified on their invoices, they're licking the Q-tip. Yes. But I will say, so Heather Smith, the conservator who worked on the cropsey, actually did a program with us, I think 2 years ago, where she talks in detail about this, and you can find it on our YouTube channel. But I don't know if you know this yet, Daniel, but Heather is going to be the Jody Long speaker this year. So our volunteer group
Society plans, I think it's every May, I think, maybe it's April or May, they have a big event, which is a dinner and a featured speaker. And this year it's going to be Heather talking about some of the projects she's done related to our collection. And people love to hear about conservation and understand the process of conservation. So I think people will really enjoy that opportunity. And it's open to the public. You do not have to be a Singer Society member. There's just a per person fee for the dinner and the program.
Good to know. It sounds like it'll be a very interesting one. So she may indeed talk about this one. I mean, after the treatment, the painting really improved. It really needed help. There's the before and the after. And a lot of times, it's really interesting. I'll show you a couple of other examples of things we've worked on. This was you can see this painting on view in our Smith Gallery by Cropsey, as well as our Alexander Lomans, which is on view in our Mason Gallery of the museum. It was veiled again in this discolored varnish. And look at that when she was working on it, the difference. I mean, it was really, it's night and day. I mean, all of this is completely concealed below that.
And I'm sure the details of the foliage, are really much more astoundingly clear now. A lot of fine detail will just get lost when you have a dirty canvas like that.
Yes. And very recently, this is on view. If you come into the museum, it's on view on the right-hand side of our lobby. A work that I'm trying to establish some attribution on because it's not signed. Attributed to George Dury, who was an American landscape painter, but it's actually also reminiscent of Asher B. Durand. I don't think it's quite as tightly painted as Durand in terms of his style, but we had this conserved. And again, this painting was really heavily yellowed, the varnish. And you can see the difference. I always like to look at the photo during, and you can see it looks like it has soot on it or something.
And sometimes it's nicotine from people smoking. Sometimes it's natural discoloration over time. Yes. I remember borrowing some paintings, in my prior life that had been hanging in a hotel dining room, and literally it was Highland cattle, so they were shaggy. They were shaggy cows, but they also had like marmalade on them from being like over the buffet table, and so that added extra shag to them. Yeah, but it is. I will say, better to leave a painting alone than to try to mess with it yourself. Get a professional conservator or just leave it alone. That's my advice.
Definitely. And this one actually ends up being a nice selection because it looks like, I could be wrong, but in terms of the foliage in this painting, it looks like September, maybe early October. It looks kind of a little bit like autumn if you look at the vegetation here. So, it's nice in terms of as we begin to wrap things up. And then we also had conservation done on another work with an attribution to Alexander Wyant, who was a tonalist painter, American, of landscape with stream, low water, possibly painted in Arizona. Interesting. And you can see the during and after. Again, the results really quite amazing. This half clean, this side dirty.
One thing, conservators do, the way they work is that they try to make sure, first of all, that they try to limit invasiveness as much as possible, right? They want to do the gentlest, least invasive treatment to something. And they also want the work they do, if they're doing any in painting, it needs to be reversible, because in 50 years, the profession may change. There may be different products. There may be different approaches. So the idea is whatever a conservator does should be reversible by another conservator in the future. You don't ever want to over clean something, because you can't put stuff back that you've taken away. if you're stripping paint or creating abrasion. So they often will put like a barrier layer between the actual, artist's canvas and the work that they do. And of course, famously, conservators are artists and scientists. So there is a lot of chemistry and science that goes into training a professional museum conservator, as well as art history, so that they understand the methods and materials associated with particular periods in art history. It is not an easy thing to do, to train to be an art conservator. I will say that.
No, it is not.
Deep respect for all of them.
And I should point out that these two American landscapes were, the conservation was supported by a Stuart Houston Charitable Trust grant that really allowed us to do this. And we have received support from the Houston Trust over the last several years to help conserve works donated by Stuart Houston a number of years ago.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun to be able to see progress going, each year, get a couple more paintings, getting a little bit of revitalization. It's great. And these are hanging right now in the front hallway of the museum, although I think we might be taking them down soon. Am I right?
Yes, we will be taking them down because we have our treasure sale fundraiser.
Oh, well, yes, we do that for a few days because actually we get so crowded that we don't want anything hanging in the front hallway of the museum to be susceptible to injury.
Yes.
But I think, are we going to reinstall some prints from the collection, or are we going to do that sort of in the other side of the hallway?
I think we may do that on the other side, but we'll have to see. Maybe time to change what we have in the immediate front area. And I think probably we could open it up to questions.
Sure. Anybody have any questions for us as we wind down here? I think it was, I really enjoyed going through this PowerPoint myself before the talk, because we do have a really rich collection. I've talked in the past, I have a thing for small landscapes. I like the idea that a tiny landscape can kind of pull you into a whole world. And so we've talked about doing an exhibition of just intimate landscapes, but I think doing an exhibition of fall landscapes could be kind of fun too. So do let us know what you think about that idea. Let us know if you have any questions. And I'm always saying, if you have ideas for future Let's Talk Art topics, you can let us know that as well. What is the next? I think you and I are supposed to be talking about Picasso in December. Is that the next Let's Talk?
That's right. Yep. And we'll be talking about Picasso on paper, the artist as printmaker, 1923 to 1972. And
there's certainly a lot to talk about.
Oh, yes. We also have another special show, Childhood Favorites, 100 Years of Children's Book Illustration.
And that's really fun. We're getting a really warm response, our advanced sort of promotion for this, because everybody really connects to this. So I think over the holidays, we've got this wonderful sort of yin yang. We have Picasso, which is really maybe a show for sort of art geeks and connoisseurs and their prints, which makes it maybe even more that way as works on paper. But we have this childhood favorites, which absolutely connects with every single person who ever opened a book before the age of 15, probably. And I think be really fun for families over the holidays. So the Picasso I mentioned, we have a special preview night for the Picasso exhibition on Thursday, November 9th from 6 to 8. We try to keep those preview nights really affordable. I think it's like $12 a person. Maybe it's $15 if you're not a museum member, but it's certainly worth it for a glass of wine or two and a peek at the show. And then Childhood Favorites, we're opening on the Saturday after Thanksgiving, November 25th, with a family day where there will be a musical performance for kids. There'll be storytelling. There'll be art activities for children. We're really hoping to attract all of those multi-generational families who are in town celebrating the holiday together. So I'm hoping that we see a lot of you in the days to come. I did have, I think, maybe one other thing I wanted to talk about. Oh, one more thing to mention is that we do have those Friday nights in December. So go to our website, wcmfa.org, to see what's happening. That was really conceived of to go with the fact that we're in City Park here in Hagerstown, Maryland, and they do a holiday light display. And so in the evenings during December, there are often people driving through to see the lights. And I thought, let's try keeping the museum open till 8 on Fridays and see if we can get some of those families to come and enjoy the exhibitions as well. And so December 1st is really light up night. I think December 8th is a night geared at children with storytelling and hot chocolate. The 15th is a Picasso themed night. The 22nd is a last minute shopping night. So we're giving extra discounts at our shop that night. So try and stop by and visit us. I don't want the staff to be working and have nobody show up. So I'd appreciate it if you spread the word. And if you enjoy streaming art related videos, go check out our YouTube channel. All of our Let's Talk Arts are there, and they're part of a really healthy library of digital offerings. And I hope to see you all at the museum this fall.
I do as well. Yep. Thank you.